Welcome back. You're watching the CNBC-TV18 special, a G20 expert panel led by the chairman of the 15th Finance Commission, NKSingh, has submitted its report on the reforms as far as the multilateral development banks are concerned. 30 recommendations have been presented by NKSingh's panel to strengthen multilateral development banks. The report has been submitted. It proposes a tripling of the non-concessional lending by institutions like the World Bank and the IMF to $300 billion by 2030. It's also called on the multilateral development banks to increase the private capital mobilization fourfold from the current $60 billion to $240 billion. Joining me now to discuss the recommendations is the co-convener of the G20 expert group, NKSingh. Mr. Singh, always a pleasure. Many thanks for joining us here on CNBC-TV18. Before I come to you on the specific recommendations of your report, let me address the crucial issue that is staring at us today. You're in Marrakesh, meeting with central bankers, meeting with finance ministers. Just a few weeks ago, when you and Larry Summers were here in India, talking about the world quite literally being on fire. And today it is. We've got rockets going off, we've got gunfire, escalation of tensions in the Middle East. What is the outlook there as you speak with central bankers and finance ministers on the global challenges?
So I think that, clearly the events now in the Middle East have added to the global uncertainties. And people are concerned about the way in which fuel prices are likely to behave. And that's a matter which has to be factored in. But equally, of course, there is the ongoing issue of Ukraine, which remains unsettled. So these geopolitical uncertainties underline the basic philosophy of the recommendations which we have made, namely how to make the global economy and the global financial architecture more durable, more enduring, and better responsive to the contemporary challenges of vastly greater needs of financing in predictable ways, with long-term capital needs being met, the issues of poverty for which Africa is grappling with, particularly sub-Saharan Africa, low-income countries with a sharp decline in shared prosperity, and of course, the global warming and climate change, which looms large. So the events only reiterate and reinforce the importance of the wide-ranging recommendations. Larry and I, as co-conveners, with a very distinguished set of co-panelists to be able to present before the G20. Indeed, yesterday, I had the privilege for the second time to speak to the finance ministers and governors of central bank to present the last part of my report. And the participation was overwhelming. Indeed, we were greatly heartened, grateful for the positive responses which we have received to recommendations which are clearly ambitious, recommendations which will seek to fundamentally alter architecture, economic management.
You're right in pointing out that these are ambitious and audacious recommendations that you have put forward. And let's address that issue of capital mobilization that you speak of, Mr. Singh, because, you've pointed out in the report that multilateral development banks should triple their non-concessional lending to $300 billion a year by 2030. They should triple their concessional funding to $90 billion per annum by 2030 with ramped up donor support. How do you propose that this is going to happen? How confident do you feel about being able to get from where we are to where you want them to be?
Well, Shireen, you are right. Prima facie, they may look very ambitious, but we have also given a financing plan, a credible financing plan. So let me take you through in 2 minutes with that financing plan. First, let's come to the non-concessional part, which is the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development. and the similar normal OCR, ordinary capital resource lending, from other multilateral development banks. We intend to do so in three ways. First and foremost, by harnessing and optimizing the balance sheet, the existing balance sheet of these multilateral development banks. There's a huge leeway. The World Bank has recognized this because I'm happy to be able to share the view. Ever since we presented our first report, the World Bank itself has evolved as the biggest multilateral development bank in the family of multilateral development banks, has itself evolved in a significant way. In fact, the latest report yesterday presented to the Development Committee embeds and encapsulates the more important proposals which we have. It doesn't go into the tripling, but all these ideas for harnessing private capital, doing innovative financing, hybrid capital, use of guarantees, changing operational models, making the GEM available, the data available to private investors, on issues of risk mitigation of the private sector, are all contained in the new paper. So we are gratified that credible action has not only begun by the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, but indeed by the other multilateral development banks, with the initiatives taken by the African Development Bank, initiatives of the Asian Development Bank, the Latin American Bank, the Inter-American Bank as they are called, has yesterday signed a memorandum in being able to significantly enhance its lending. So I think that this is the inflection point. The global uncertainties are really inducing multilateral development banks to discover their relevance, to address the contemporary challenges and the uncertainties which we face. So I told you the first set of proposals on harnessing the balance sheet internationally. The second set of proposals emanate from a much better harnessing of private capital. To give you a ballpark figure, currently, the most efficient intermediators of capital in the world have been the multilateral development banks. Indeed, this is their raison d'etre. This is something very unique only to them, against a capitalization of just 20 billion. International Bank for Reconstruction and Development has harnessed 900 billion. Look at that. In sharp contrast to that, last when it comes to private capital, the record has been disappointing, if not abysmal. It's $1, they have been able to harness only 0.6 cents of private capital. Why? Because of the operational model, because of the mindset, which is lending on their own balance sheet strength, because of the mindset in which accountability, targets, assessments, and evaluation are based on the own balance sheet. Change that. Change it to make it less risk averse, to take more informed risk decisions, to be able to harness the vast amount of private capital which exists. This will significantly alter the amount of finances. If that can be leveraged in the same creative way that it has done, a vast amount of resources available, was make it better and to make it bolder are the first two aspects of my report on which I have commented briefly. To, of course, make it bigger, then you go on to all these complex issues of how do you garner more innovatively? Is recapitalization a fundamental necessity? Perhaps, but in the sequencing and the framework, making them better, making them bolder, has a degree of high priority. Indeed, they are in the region of what may be described as the lower hanging fruits than the more difficult challenge of making them bigger through a recapitalization process. Making them bigger through optimization of the balance sheet and through private capital is no-brainer. But on the issue of recapitalization, I think that each multilateral development bank will need to assess their own balance sheet strength, seek the approvals of their own shareholders, their own governance structures. But we have made one very important recommendation. That is, that if multilateral development banks act in tandem, act in symmetry, act as a family, and not act in silos, it can make an enormous difference. It's a classic case. Outcome, the final product, is much bigger than the sum of the parts.
Right. Mr. Singh, before I let you go, very quickly, sir, you were talking about being able to address contemporary challenges, and a challenge that has gotten worse, of course, is debt sustainability. And one of the recommendations is that the World Bank and the IMF issue new guidelines for debt sustainability assessment to reduce the impact of cyclical and global shocks. And I just wanted to understand from you how concerned you are about the current state of affairs, and more importantly, what's the one big thing that you would like to see change as part of the recommendations on this front?
So on the issue of the debt, I think that the multilateral development banks must act in tandem with the International Monetary Fund. The roundtable discussions on debt sustainability needs to be reinvigorated. Indeed, they are deeply conscious of this, and the need for both the MDBs and the IMF to act in tandem is never more clear, never more compelling when it comes to the issues of mounting debt burdens. But there are two ways in which you can address the debt burdens. The short term, of course, you want perhaps a rescheduling, perhaps kick the debt down. The long run, what matters is growth. What matters is resource multipliers. What matters is infrastructure, the ability of countries to grow much faster, which enables them a tax buoyancy and a tax GDP ratio significantly improve. That is why, Shireen, the centerpiece of our recommendation is out of the 3 trillion which are needed between now and 2030 every year, 2 trillion is expected from domestic resource mobilization. How? Through better reforms, to improve tax buoyancy, through structural changes, through macroeconomic policies, which is able to harness global capital, trigger growth process. Nothing more fundamental in addressing the issue of debt than a set of recommendations which lead you to change policies and adopt policies which can promote growth with macroeconomic stability.
Dr. Singh, we are completely out of time, but we appreciate you joining us from Marrakesh, where you have presented Volume 2 of the recommendations for the reforms needed for the multilateral development banks to address some of the contemporary challenges and to be bigger, better and bolder. Appreciate your time. Thanks very much for joining us on CNBC TV 18. We are going to take a break here. There's a lot more coming up. Don't go anywhere. We're back in a minute with more.